a tutti. Welcome to the Co.As.It Italian Family History Group's first event in 2015 here at the Palace Cinema. I'm Ron Seggi from Universal Studios, Florida. Tonight, we have a special evening with our featured guest speaker, John Barnes, President of New Italy. Please take your seats and please take a moment to turn off your phones. We hope that you will enjoy the evening.
So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Buonasera, signore e signori, in Italiano. Benvenuti a tutti. Welcome to the Italian Family History Group's first event for 2015. My name is Art Phillips. In Italiano, it's not on the birth certificate, but it's Arturo Di Filippo. And that's because I have 4 grandparents that were actually born in Italy, but I'm second generation. This evening, we're very fortunate to launch our first event in 2015 with our special guest speaker, John Barnes, the president of New Italy, which is a community in northern New South Wales, Woodburn, not far from Ballina, which was settled by a group of Italians back in 1881, 82, who carved a living and established a village in the isolated countryside of Australia with very harsh conditions, poor soils, etc. John, in fact, is a descendant of one of the original settlers. New Italy and New Italy Museum is a body which is entrusted with the preservation and promotion of the story and the display of Italian culture, which is on their site of the original settlement. Firstly, we're really grateful and thank the support of Antonio Zeccola and family for the opportunity to hold our events here at Palace Cinemas. A few months ago, the Italian Family History Group now began a new official membership, so to speak. It's very easy to become a member if you go to our brand new website, which is sitting up here. Well, one of the things that I try and interject occasionally at our events is some sort of a little sort of Italian cultural touch. You know, we try and show a bit of video or whatever, but and I recently finished a new album that'll be out in about a week or so, and one of the songs on the album is a very old song, well, it's not that old, from the 50s, called Come Prima, and that translated means like before. And of course, you probably all remember the most popular version of the song was released by the Italian vocalist Domenico Modugno in 1958. And he actually passed away very young. In 1994 he passed away, but he was a singer, songwriter, actor, and also later in life a member of the Italian Parliament. So my rendition of the song is a medley that I decided to do with another beautiful piece written by Charlie Chaplin, of all people, in 1936 from a film called Modern Times. And the song is called Smile. And I sort of interject a bit of smile with this because it sort of works quite nice. Okay, so without sort of any further nonsense from me, about 5 minutes late, sorry about that, I always go over. I wanted to make an official introduction to John Barnes. Thank you very much for coming all the way from Woodburn a couple days ago. You've been in town for a while, so please come on up.
Thank you very much, Art. It's a pleasure to be here. In fact, I'm back in Norton Street for the first time in about 55 years. I had an auntie who lived up the other end of Norton Street in Augusta Street. And I remember coming along this street in the tram. And I think actually I've been to the pictures here once or twice when I was about 15. Anyway, so I knew where Norton Street was when I was told I was coming here. You might wonder how a chap with the surname of Barnes is talking about something Italian. Well, my mother was a Spinazzi, S-P-I-N-A-Z-E, or a Spinazzi, and her mother was a Kaplan, and actually her mother had been married twice, and her previous husband, her first married name was Tome, or Tomei. So my mother was Australian born in 1908 of Italian parents on both sides. And my father was of mixed English, Irish, Danish and Swiss background. So there's quite a mix. How did I become to be president of New Italy? Well, I'd grown up with the story that I'll tell you shortly. And in my retirement, I was looking for something to do, and I decided to get involved, and I knew they were struggling for members and active members, and I thought I'd volunteer my time to cut the grass down there. Here I am, president a few years later. Now, the Marquis de Ray expedition. The Marquis de Ray was a Frenchman, and that is the Marquis de Ray. He was very aristocratic, commanding figure, using his family money, and a very persuasive personality. And he had grown up, his background was very aristocratic. The aristocratic family went right back into French history to the Middle Ages, and they had quite a distinguished record. They lived in a very large chateau, or maybe a small castle, in the western part of France. But they lost it during the French Revolution. He was born in 1831, which was about 50 years after, or 40 years after the Revolution. But he grew up with the stories of the family's glories of the past, and also what he considered that he wanted to live in a place similar or the same as France before the Revolution. And he cultivated these ideas in his head and decided to embark or launch a colonisation scheme in the Pacific. Now, large parts of the Pacific at the time were unclaimed by any European country. So, in effect, it was possible to go and claim a part of the Pacific as your own, because no other European power had claimed various parts of it. And after his initial attempt was to claim part of Western Australia, and establish a French colony there, but of course that wasn't allowed. And so he claimed what is today part of eastern New Guinea, an area around the islands of New Britain and New Ireland. That was the original family home or castle. The birthplace of the Marquis de Ray is right over there in the western part of France. And he set about advertising this scheme throughout Europe. And he was able to get something like 5,000 people to subscribe money to this scheme to found this colony in the Pacific. The people bought shares, and with all the hype associated with it, the price of the shares rose from 5 francs to 50. It was possible to get involved with this scheme as a shareholder and stay in Europe, as a shareholder and travel on the scheme, or as an employee of the scheme with entitlements to land after 5 years of work at the site. He advertised all over Europe, and he was able to convince a large number of people, about 340 of them actually, from the province of Veneto in Italy. There were another probably 400 or 500 people from various parts of Europe were also involved in the scheme as well. But we'll concentrate on the Italians. The Italian government was very suspicious of the whole idea and refused permission for the people to sail. They went to Marseille and were refused permission by the French, so they went to Spain. And eventually, after a lot of harassment of the Spanish authorities, they were allowed to sail from Marseille. Now, why did these people want to leave home? The area was very impoverished. As a result of the Napoleonic Wars, the Austrians occupied that part of Italy, as you probably know, up until about 1866. These people were leaving the area in about 1880. That was one of the advertisements for the scheme. He endeavoured to involve the church, but the church didn't want anything to do with him because they saw through it too. A lot of the brochures that he used had illustrations in them that were actually based on Tahiti, had nothing to do with New Guinea at all. He conjured up or invented this paradise in the Pacific that he was selling shares in from a riotous imagination. Even as a schoolboy, he was known as having a riotous imagination that was out of all proportion to reality. That's the voyage from Veneto to Marseille by train. To Barcelona also to Barcelona also by train and by ship across the Mediterranean through the Suez, via Ceylon to Singapore, and then up here to New Guinea. Now they were on the India. That first vessel that was shown in the leading slide was the India, built as a sailing vessel, but it had been converted and also had steam engines on board, so it had 2 modes of propulsion. But because they put the steam engines in, they needed a lot of room for coal, which restricted accommodation space, 340 people, men, women and kids, in a very tight space. Food on board was plentiful but poor. A lot of the meat was very badly preserved and had to be thrown overboard, and really the deaths had started to occur before they had crossed the Mediterranean. And the deaths continued all the way. Really what saved them was putting into ports to get decent food. I think I mentioned the ship was the 3rd of 4 that made the voyage. Now the first 2 vessels were for original workers to establish the homes and whatever else was necessary or was promised on New Ireland. You can see New Ireland there at the top. The very southern pit was known as Port Breton, the settlement point now. What happened on the way out, a lot of the crews of these ships, which were meant to establish the colony, they deserted on the way. And also when they arrived, they were disheartened and virtually nothing was done. So the India arrived with 340 people to an absolute, virtually desolate place. Rocky, extremely inhospitable climate, very hot, a lot of disease, skin complaints, malaria, dysentery, poor food, you name it. And it was very poor rocky soil. There were several people lost to cannibals and crocodiles, and it was very, very inhospitable. After settlement attempts, which were for about 5 months, the people decided that they'd better get out of there and to make way to Australia. Now, they knew by then that the ship couldn't make it, so they went to New Caledonia, which is off the coast of Queensland, a French possession off the coast of Queensland. When they left New Ireland, they had 15 days food and 18 days water, they'd worked out. It took them 20 days to get to New Caledonia. Several deaths occurred as they were entering the harbour in New Caledonia. Now, the French authorities did all they possibly could for them. The ship was classed as a semi-starved hospital vessel. But at the time, New Caledonia was a penal colony. And they didn't want to stay there. So they got word to Sir Henry Parkes in Sydney of their destitute situation. And he sent a rescue vessel up called the James Patterson, because the India was no longer seaworthy, and they were picked up and taken to Sydney. Now, they arrived in Sydney on the 7th of April 1881, 217 of the original 340. The 1 in 3 had died on the way. There had been a few births. Now, my grandfather, he was about 9 months when they left Europe, so he would have been about 1.5 or so when they arrived in Sydney. And I put his survival down to mother's milk. Yeah. Because toddlers died. If they were off the breast, they died. That was one of the buildings that was prefabricated and they brought out on the ship. It was erected and its remains are still there today, I believe, in New Guinea. Now, that photograph was taken in New Guinea in 1880 by a Methodist missionary by the name of George Brown. There is a native in the picture. Most of the people were living on the ship. Some people did move ashore to live in tents. Now, can anyone tell me the breed of the dog? It's a well-known Italian sheepdog from northern Italy that they obviously brought with them. I threw that one in because they obviously brought the dog with them. It's a very intelligent, good sheepdog, I believe. Now, that is a millstone that the people brought with them, and that's it was in a park in Rabaul that was left behind, of course. Because of the volcanoes in Rabaul, it's now in Lorengau. It's outside the museum in Lorengau in New Italy. I have attempted to get it brought to Australia and put in our museum at New Italy, but it's a prohibited export. We're not allowed to take it from New Guinea. It would be quite a centrepiece, a story piece, if we could get hold of it. Now, that is an artist's impression of the people arriving in Sydney on April the 7th, 1881. I don't think there were too many top hats among them. How that got into the artist's impression, I don't know. Now, when the people arrived, they were in a really bad state, although the French efforts had paid quick dividends in restoring a lot of the health. Most of the people had just arrived with the clothes they stood up in, unable to speak English, often illiterate in Italian as well as English, of course, and in desperate situations. Many husbands had died and many wives had died. So before very long there were quite a number of widower marriages. And my grandmother was a product of one of those marriages. When they arrived, they had to sign a paper that said they would do whatever the government wanted them to do for 12 months. As a group, they wanted to stay together because of what they'd been through, and they knew one another back home and so on. They wanted to stay together. That wasn't allowed. They were split up and said they had to remain apart for 12 months. They were split into family groups and employed on farms and wherever, in areas between the south coast, the Goulburn area, and the northern areas of Sydney, and also the Hunter Valley. Initially, before they moved to get work, they were accommodated in the Domain here in Sydney, just behind the Macquarie Street. There was a very big building there known as the Exhibition Building, which later burnt down. But attached to the Exhibition Building was an agricultural hall, and they were accommodated in that hall. Within 6 weeks, everybody had a job. Remarkable. Within 6 weeks. Young girls got work as, were recruited as domestic servants, women as, I dare say, domestics as well, and men mostly farm work. That is Sir Henry Parkes. He rescued the people from New Caledonia and thereafter regarded the people with a lot of affection. He had a soft spot for them, and he did whatever he could for them because he felt he was responsible. Once he'd rescued them, he still thought he was responsible. He was Premier of New South Wales actually 5 times. And his assistance, or lack of it, to the people would vary as to whether or not he was Premier, I believe. And he features later. I'll talk further in the talk, I'll mention him again. After the 12 months of working in various parts of the state, they regrouped. The people regrouped, and they heard that there was good land available on the north coast of New South Wales. There was land available at £1 an acre, and there were 3,000 acres. Now, this land had been bypassed by earlier settlers who were looking for sugarcane land and cattle land. It was rumoured that the soil was okay and it was heavily timbered. So what happened was that largely as a group, over 200 people moved up to Woodburn, and then by ship, and then walked the 10k from Woodburn to what is today New Italy, through the bush. That was taken early after settlement. They are cane cutters. You'll notice there are a few musical instruments. If you look closely, I think you can see a violin. The chap in the middle has a violin, and someone there also has a piano accordion, and the big knives are cane knives. That's another group of Italian cane cutters, taken about the same time. Cane was all then cut by hand. Now, why were the men out cutting cane? Why weren't they working at home? Well, it turns out that the soil was only very shallow, and under that was clay, and it still is today. I can show you if you're ever up there. It's very clay, so it was not suitable for agriculture, but somehow they were able to eke out a subsistence living from this very poor soil. The areas per family were about 40 to 60 acres. Too small to do much with, apart from vegetables and fruit trees, and grapes, of course. So what happened was that the women stayed at home with the kids, and the men went and worked in the cane fields or the sugar mill. There was the year they arrived, the Broadwater sugar mill opened, and that's about 20k away. And so often they worked there during the week, came home at weekend, or they might have been gone for a month or more because communications or transport facilities were very poor. The houses were made of mud bricks with an iron roof. And if any of you come up to New Italy today, we've rebuilt the place with mud bricks as testament to the pioneers. That was one of the original dwellings. Now that was the coach house on the highway and horse change station on the highway, because it is on the Pacific Highway, which didn't have that name then. It was only really a horse and buggy track. But there was overnight accommodation there, And the village itself grew to a maximum of about 300 people. It had 2 stores, a wine shop, a church, a post office, and about 5 years after they arrived, there was a school established. And the first teacher was a Frenchman who was multilingual. He spoke Italian, French, and of course English. And he did a tremendous amount for the people because he was the link, the outside link. He had about 300 Italians living in the middle of the bush, isolated from just about everywhere, with subsistence farms. There was enough money and enough food to keep you alive, but no money, or very little money. The only money was made by the men who worked outside and came home infrequently. That's a sawmill established by the Rosalind family at a place called Monum, which is the next little area to New Italy. When I mention New Italy again, I'm reminded of the fact that initially they called the settlement the Cell of Venice. Cell, I cannot pronounce it in Italian, but that means the unit of Venice, or the group of Venetian people. When they applied to get the school, the local priest from Corokai and someone else applied that they have a school, they wanted to name it after the village, and the education department said, oh no, let's just call it New Italy. Everyone understands what that is. Of course, they couldn't understand the Italian name. Dairying was attempted, but the soil was so poor there's a mineral deficiency, and so the cattle quickly developed very weak bones. So dairying was not successful. In areas further away, a lot of men did leave the area and go dairy farming. Now, if you have a close look at that photograph, there's 8 people in it. There's a few kids poking their heads out from behind cows and so on, but there's 8 in it. Morandini's farm. I often think that a lot has not been written about what the women did. The women really held it together with their farming and their hard work. There's really a story in what the women did. The very high birth rate, there was something like 20 births a year throughout the village. As the younger generation was growing up, most of them were leaving, and so the older members of the families were staying there, but the young men were leaving. Now, the European end of the Silk Road from China was Venice. And the technology of making silk reached Venice about the year 1200. And Venice and that area, the rural areas nearby, became one of the centres of European silk production. France was another centre, but these people brought the technology of making silk with them. When they realised that this is something they could do, the government gave them very low interest loans via Sir Henry Parkes, very low interest loans to establish a silk industry. Now, the mulberry tree grows very fast, and within 2 years you can harvest a profusion of leaves from it to feed the silkworms. Now, they cultivated the mulberry trees, cultivated the silkworms on the leaves, harvested the silk from the cocoon, wove the silk into thread. From the thread, they made garments and entered them in international competition and won first prizes in Chicago and Milan. Amazing. And they wove those cloths and garments on handmade looms. There's a silkworm. And again, the bicycle wheel has been used as one of the parts. There's a grand prize of the next one. The Piccoli family were well noted for their prowess at producing silk. That's a very interesting photograph. A lot of the original settlers, well, they're all original settlers. That was taken in 1890 by a roving photographer who visited the village. Now, my great-grandmother is in the second row, second from the right, and her second married name was Kaplan, and her husband is the 4th from the left on the second row from the back. He's got a hat on. And his name was Lorenzo Kaplan, and his first wife had died. And so you had a widow marrying a widower. How they come to be separate in the photograph, I don't know. Maybe they weren't talking that day. I don't know. Another interesting piece of information. They married a month after their respective husbands and wives had died. So just a little bit of gossip, maybe, I don't know. You can see the names there: Tedesco, Bazzo, Faber, Spinisi, Piccoli, Martinzuni, Kaplan, Roda, Filicetti. All those names, Antonelli, all those names are very common on the North Coast today. Yeah. Now, that photograph was taken about 45 years after they arrived. Yes, 1926. So you get the contrast between the two photographs. By then they'd married into an Irish family, the Flynns, a lot of them, and two of the people in that photograph are still alive today, in their 90s, and that photograph was taken in 1926. My uncle, Spencer, he is the baby about the centre of the photograph, centre left, looking with his in his mother's arms with his back to the camera. And the other person is the girl in the white dress. There's two girls in white dresses. Well, it's the second one from the left, Pearl Morgan. She was my grandfather's niece or something. There's so many of them, I forget them all. I forget where the connections are sometimes. My mother's in that photograph. She's the girl kneeling on the extreme right, and she's slightly blurred. She obviously moved when they took the photograph. Mum, I worked out Mum was 18 at the time. She was born in 1908. That home was built by the Spinisi family. Antonio, my uncle Tony, and he's in the centre of the, he was the godfather of the group, for want of a better word. He's in the centre left, and he had 7 children, 5 sons and 2 daughters, and he died rather young. He was only 60-odd, but he left a tremendous legacy. He really left a tremendous legacy. He became an outstanding farmer. Cattle, dairy cattle, pigs and bananas. And in the 50s and for quite some years, his farm was regarded as a model, and they used to take all the students, all the agriculture students from the university to visit the place when they came up to the North Coast. Now, that photograph was taken in 1961 when they unveiled the monument at New Italy. See, New Italy lasted for approximately 50 years. By then, all the older people had died, and the younger generation had all moved away. So it reached its peak about the turn of the century, about 1900, 1910, it was at its peak, and then there was gradual decline. The school closed in 1932, and the land was poor, and the blocks of land were too small. So people moved away, but the memories remained. Now, I mentioned twice that they arrived in Sydney on the 7th of April 1881, and that day was retained in the memory of them all, and each year they used to celebrate it. It was known as Deliverance Day. Deliver us from evil. Then it became Anniversary Day, and now it's called Carnevale Italiano. Now, my grandfather is there second from the left. The first male on the left, yes. That's 2 of his sisters beside him. They were the original survivors of the expedition. Born in Italy, survived the expedition, grew up in Australia. That was the original settlement. It was a map of the original settlement block and the various lanes that went through it. And the family names are all there if you have a close look. Now, that is Frank Scarabellotti. He wasn't on the voyage, but he was born not long after they arrived, of a family. He had older brothers and sisters who were on the voyage. Frank Scarabellotti. He died as Australia's oldest man just a few years ago. He was 109, 5 or 6 years ago. A lovely chap, amazing, absolutely amazing chap. He was just like he looks, a real gentleman. Now, that is the grave of the Marquis de Ray, the guy that started it all. I visited that in France about 2 years ago. I went to his grave. Everyone else has been going back to the villages where the family came from. I didn't go there. I wanted to track this guy there. And I've attempted to find his descendants. He had 5 children, 1 son and 4 daughters. The son went to South America, so I didn't try and chase him or his descendants, but I tried to chase relatives in France and I got no response because I was trying to tie it all up. But I got no response and I was rather disappointed. But maybe I thought then I could try through the local councils or something like that in France. I haven't got to it yet, but I'd like to, because to tie it all up and say, well, you know, it's all over. We're sorry about that, and I dare say you're sorry, but maybe we should meet. I know members of Ned Kelly's family have met families of the policemen that he shot. Ned shot 3 policemen. And a few years ago, they all met. And I thought that was a lovely gesture. And I thought we might be able to do the same thing, but no luck yet. That was my grandfather taken at 26, about the time he got married. He was born in Italy, as I said, survived the voyage, grew up in Australia, and he worked in the sugar industry, in the sugar mill. He got a steam or boilers operator's certificate. For some time he worked on the vessels that pulled the cane up and down the river. And then, of course, the other photographers taken in later life. Now, you just might have a little bit of look here of social history. He's working at body height, long pants and long sleeves, a hat, a tin bucket. He's chopping up kindling for the stove in the kitchen. He's in his vegetable garden. He's thin, and he was 92, and he died that night. He died that night. And that is the end. Now, if there's any questions, I could have spoken more, but there's just so much to say. Now, New Whitley today. In 1981, there was a big reunion in Lismore of all the descendants. They got 3,000 people there. And they had it at the showground. And with the money made, they did all sorts of things to make money. The money made, they bought some land back at New Whitley, which is right now on the highway. They bought 17 acres of land, and on it they built a replica Italian village with a courtyard, a hall, a 2-storey mud brick building, a big pavilion, and another area which is a museum and a restaurant. We have quite some plans for the future, and there is talk of a TV documentary being made on the whole story. And at the time of the arrival of the people in 1881, and for some years afterwards, a total of 100 articles were written in the Sydney Morning Herald, or about 100 articles on the people, on the voyage and so on. So I hope I filled you in, but if there are any questions, yes?
Absolutely fantastic. I'll walk around with the mic. It's probably the easiest thing to do. So, okay, so I'll just pass the mic around so we can all hear each other really well.
Yes, I read the story elsewhere many times. The only, for curiosity, I still don't know how, since the boat was so primitive, how they communicate with the rest of the world at the time.
And there were missionaries in the area, but communications was only by ship, and it was very slow. One thing I forgot to mention is, I'm often asked, what happened to the Marquis de Ray that started it all? Well, he spent 6 years in jail, and he died soon after his release. He was charged with homicide through neglect.
Yeah, so you said there was about, what, 40 families that actually came from Sydney right to there, about 200 people, eh? Yeah. Was there a question over here? Yeah, I'll pass it on.
I just wanted to ask about the silk that they made. When did that sort of stop?
What happened to the silk was that there was a bushfire went through the place which burnt the mulberry trees, and shortly after that the weaving and loom machinery was also burnt in a separate fire. So that sort of killed the industry a bit, and also they had trouble selling it because it's been said that Australia wasn't ready for silk. Australia was a pretty basic country, I can tell you, 130 years ago, and it wasn't, and it wasn't ready for expensive silk. That's what I've been led to believe caused the demise of the industry.
Right. And okay, great. Thank you. That's wonderful.
There was, during the First World War, something like 15 Italians from the settlement volunteered, and several were killed. And we're doing a memorial board for them at the moment with a government subsidy, government grant. And during the Second World War, quite a number of my relatives were in the Australian Army. Sometimes embarrassment because of Italian names, but no, nothing serious, no.
How close was the cane cutting fields to Woodburn?
About 10k away.
Okay.
From New Whitley, about 10k,
Right,
yes.
so just north, yeah?
That's right.
Yeah, okay. Question?
Potatoes.
Excuse me, is there any documentation about how people overcame the language barriers, or what was...
When the school was established, Italian was forbidden in the school. And then I dare say men working outside, process of assimilation, the men learned it faster than the women because they had more exposure to English. There is an account of the kids at school one time, they were playing in the playground and all speaking Italian, and the teacher pulled them up and said, "Oh, you've got to speak English." And the kids said, "Well, we don't know how to play in English."
The basic thing is that initially when the formation of New Italy, I'm led to believe that there's a 29-year-old Italian in the group who went up to the Richmond River. There's a Richmond River there?
Richmond
River. And he inspected this place initially and came back and to talk to his friends who were still confined in Sydney, and got about 4 or 5 of them to go up to start digging around, having a good look before they moved up there en masse.
Yeah, that's correct. It was Mr. Caminetti. He was a sailor who'd been up in that area on coastal vessels and took the story back to other Italians in Sydney. And the general assessment was that it was okay, but then when they dug, they found the clay under the topsoil.
Right, now next question. Was there not a movie made of this story before?
No,
I have a recollection when I went
there's been
movie was made.
There's been a, what do you call it, the Australian Story on TV about 30 years ago. It featured in one of the episodes of the Australian Story.
I recall seeing some of it, and I vaguely remember some of the particulars. I thought it was a complete movie, but apparently, as you say...
No, it wasn't a movie.
Sort of a documentary.
Documentary, yeah.
And the third point, we have someone in this audience tonight who was an original member of the formation of the Italian Family History Group, who is a descendant from that. And in case you don't know, you might notice on the screen all those photos, but there's one name that stood out, and that was the name Martinuzzi. Yeah. We have here today Mervyn Cardelli, and an original foundation member of the Italian Family Group, who was...
My name's Mervyn Cardelli, I'm 93, and I'm a relic of the group. My great-grandparents were named Martinuzzi.
Right.
And he was multilingual, and he was considered to be one of the leaders of the party.
Right.
he was considered to be one of the leaders of the party because of his ability to speak to everybody in all languages. And my grandmother was originally a Capulet. So I had the opportunity to go up to New Italy at the in 1880 when they had the big celebrations, and I had the opportunity to meet Lester, I think it was, Lester Spinacy.
Oh yes, his first cousin.
He was the organiser of the show.
Yeah.
Spencer. And he was the organiser of the show. We had a great time up there. And we went up there again later on. Thank you.
I have another item of interest. We did a bus trip there previously, about 12 years ago. Mervyn was with us, and the bus was full. Mervyn got very curious to find out where his ancestor was buried. He knew he was part and parcel of the group that originally went up there to New Italy, and he spoke and asked a few questions around different people, and he finally told the bus driver. Because the bus driver found out that nearly all those people who died at New Italy were buried at Woodburn. So, on the way back to Ballina, where we stayed the night, we pulled into the Woodburn cemetery. And the bus driver said, "Righto, everybody, out you get. You take a row each of the cemetery and see if you can find a grave with the name of Martinuzzi." And believe it, we found it. And Mervyn cried that night when he found the grave. Right, Merv? It was so wonderful and rewarding.
Fantastic. We have a question.
Thank you so much. Hello, I just wanted to say that my brother here and I, as well, are descendants from the families. We were Tomes.
Oh yeah.
And
All relatives.
yeah, all relatives, and we're all related somehow. And one of the parents died on the way, and so one of so it's our father's grandparents. One of them married a Kaplan.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Same family.
So same family. Then one of the children from that family, having realised that the soil obviously was not great and all of that, the story that we have about him is that he rode a push bike across the Great Dividing Range seeking new, better country, and found land near Tamworth at Ashford, not far from Inverell. He then rode the push bike back across the Great Dividing Range, got the family, put the family on a cart, and they all went back across the Great Dividing Range and settled in Ashford near Inverell, and we were born in Inverell. So my parents are I think they've met you, John.
Oh, last year.
Celebrated last year, and and they were very keen for us to come tonight because we both live down here. And it's just interesting for us to be hearing all of this amazing history and seeing it. It's fantastic. But that family then spread out around that kind of northwestern area, but still had the links back there because we ended up going to school, to boarding school in Lismore. And I was at school, I had Louise Spinacy in my class. Right. So we ended up meeting up with all these people again back at school. So anyway, I just wanted to add that.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Here we go. Pina.
Hi, John. I'm just wondering whether the area just retained that link with the Veneto or whether it attracted other Italians from other regions. And also, how did that Italian-Irish connection pan out? I'm interested in that too, because you said that a lot of the Italians actually married into one of the big Irish families, and whether that has any impact on, you know, the evolution of New Italy or the culture or anything like that.
Their marriages into what sort of outside the Italian, outside the New Italy village, probably didn't occur until about 1900. That's when sort of things by then the Italians had learnt English. There was a lot of familiarity between the other settlers in the area. See, socially what had happened is that the Italians became well known for the vino and the food and the music. Of a Sunday after Mass, there'd be bocce and then the music and cards and vino and all this, and it became the place to be on Sunday. And natural nature took its course. Of course, boy met girl, and the rest is history. And the local policeman in Woodburn was Sergeant Scroop, and my elder sister married one of his grandsons. And my grandmother told me at the time that Sergeant Scroop was very well respected because he always turned a blind eye to the vino. And also that he never had any trouble at New Italy. He never had any trouble at New Italy. That was
In control.
Yeah.
Since the land was a donation from Sir Parker's, is still Italian?
Oh no, it was eventually sold, and it's been subdivided somewhat, and it's not a productive area agriculturally. There's people living there in retirement that might have hobbies or something like that, but it is still cheap land.
In other words, it went back to the government.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
Bruno and I were there just a couple of weeks ago. Actually, we called in New Italy coming back to Sydney. What I was most impressed with when you get there, it's got the big welcome sign, and it says campers welcome. And I thought that's most unusual because everywhere you stop along the highway, no camping, no camping.
Right.
And I thought that was such a big area, and I thought that was quite a very nice thing. I thought it's typical Italian hospitality.
Yeah.
But it's a great place. You want to go. We've been about 3 or 4 times.
Oh,
and,
thank you. Thank
we
you.
always stop off. Coffee's great, and the food.
Murph.
My grandmother said about the land, she said the men knew everything. They said it was okay to go there. But she said it was no good. But she said, the men said, if they went up further, they'd have to chop down all the trees and it would take too long to do it. So that's why they settled on the land there.
So I'll just balance up from Dad. Somebody's asking about Irish connections. So I'm not sure exactly what year, but great-great-grandmother Martin Nuzzy ended up, one of her sisters married O'Brien, and Ilma O'Brien gave us a talk last year here.
Professor Ilma.
Well, Professor Ilma, but her husband O'Brien, and as it turns out, he's also...
He was a Basso.
He was a Basso, so he was indirectly related also to the early settlers as well. So both her and her husband with separate family links, coincidentally, after they'd met. But that's a result of the Irish connection, and Ilma, being a historian, has done quite a few Italian presentations, travelling presentations around Australia about migration to the country with obviously got some fantastic data available. Now, what is she? She's Monash University, Melbourne, if anybody's chasing her.
Yeah, La Trobe.
I beg your pardon, La Trobe University, Melbourne. Thank you.
Yeah, no, fantastic. We had Ilma, Dr. Ilma spoke for us last year and spoke on the interment of Australia back at World War.
There's talk of a documentary being made on the life of one of the women. Oh, actually, she was a girl of about 10 when she left Italy, so she had all the memories, and it'd make a very good story. She was never literate in either language because she was left Italy too young and got here too late, and but hers was a great story, and she married a boy who was also on the expedition after they got to Australia, of course, some years later, but they had a large family, and it'd make a very good story because by following the story of the girl and then the boy, it puts the whole thing in context.
What an interesting story. Just fantastic. want to do is actually thank our lovely cameraman, Jim Davis, who's up here in front of us. Jim, thank you very much. And I want to thank one of our committee members who's a beautiful filmmaker, Antonio Luciano, who's in the back row. He's on the committee, who has organized John's services for us. So it's the time of the night where, well, I've already thanked John, but we always present our guest speakers with a little gift, and we really didn't know what to get you, so I hope you enjoy.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, John. Under somebody's seat, we have actually put a piece of paper. So look under your seats, and if you can find the piece of paper, you get this lovely door prize. But there we go, we found it. Fantastic. There you go. Chris, what's in that pack? Chris, this is Chris Young.
You have to give a speech on it, don't you? No.
Right, this time we have orange.
Thank you.
Thank you. Which is D2.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just check the number. I saw it
Yep,
right
that's
in the day.
correct. That's right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
These are impressions of parts of Italy. I bought these two because one, my nonna came from Salina, so I've got one of Salina, and it's that one there.
You all know where it is. I just wanted to thank everybody for coming. Thank you for your support, as usual. Right, so thank you very much for coming. Thanks for your support. I'll see you next month.